These handmade scissors have been produced in Sheffield, England, for over 100 years. But compared to a $2 mass-produced pair, the kitchen scissors will cost you over $100, and a pair of professional tailor's shears cost $315. So just what is it that makes them so expensive? Denton is one of just 2 master putter togetherers left. Both in the 70s, the masters are the only ones skilled enough to undertake the final delicate part of the process, the assembly of these scissors, or putting together. When I were young, every street corner had a little shop with masters in and working. They've gone. You know, at one stage, we were doing, like, 85-90 different types of scissor. In the 1970s, there were 150 small-scale scissor workshops in Sheffield. Now there are just 2. And keeping this craft alive relies on training the next generation of apprentices. You know, it's just got that light magic touch. How to hold them, how to stroke them, how to edge them. And this, to instill on young lads, is hard. Because it's not something you can write down and let them read. They've got to actually do it. Unlike cheaper mass-manufactured scissors, almost all of the work is done by hand. The starting outline of the scissor is hot drop forged off-site. This is called a blank, and while it may already have the shape of a very rough pair of scissors, the process has only just begun. The blanks first need to be drilled, counterbored, and tapped. This puts in a hole in the center of each half and adds a thread to that hole. Once that work is done, the blades have to be ground down. The blank has no blade on it whatsoever, so initial grinding has to be done on a 50-year-old Vieto machine before further refinements are done by hand. So, if you were to look at a cheap pair of scissors, you'd quickly notice that it's actually a stamped-out piece of metal that have just been bolted together and a blade's edge put on them. So, when we grind the inside of the blade, we'll say there are 3 angles to it. You've got to have a curve from the pinch of the scissor to the point, which means that when the blades are together, you should be able to see a gap through the middle. We'll also want to grind in a twist, and then finally, we want to hollow the blade as well. And what that'll give us is a scissor that will only ever touch at the cutting edge. Once the blade is on, the rough edges need to be sanded off from the bow, the shanks, and the nail holes. After everything's sanded down, the scissors are sent off to be hardened, turning the soft, workable metal into a hard final product. Then they're put into the rumbler for a few hours to be acid treated before being dried. Rumbling takes off any grind marks on the surface of the metal and prepares them for polishing. Jonathan, we do different types of scissors. If it was our embroidery stalk, then we could work on maybe 500 embroidery stalks over 2 weeks to a month. However, if we were doing same size batch, 513-inch scissors, then we probably wouldn't even see that within a year. The blades are polished by hand to a mirror finish. Then comes the hardest part, putting together. Traditionally, you would undertake a 5-year apprenticeship before you could even sit at the putter's table. I've never had a background like this before. I went straight into an office right out of university, and I was walking down this street, and I saw a chalkboard that said, "Scissor makers wanted." And I thought I've always wanted to work with my hands, but I've had no training in working with my hands. My training began 8 months ago, and it doesn't look like it's gonna stop for at least another few years. Once the 2 halves are married together, a final blade will be put on the scissor. Perfecting this skill can take years. Denton, well, I started in 1959. Roughly the same. Steady, hammers. Other than we had lights hanging over to get more light. You'll learn. You'll never forget. It's up here in a diary. Somebody say a scissor, and it just comes up on a projection in me head. Manicure, dissecting, thread clip. all different scissors. Sheffield has been home to England's blade-making industry since as far back as the 14th century. It's where stainless steel was originally invented, and it's a city that's famed for its cutlery production. Cliff started making scissors when he was just 15. When I pick a pair of scissors up, it tells me a story. I can open and shut it. It's tight, it's slack. You can virtually just shove it with the weight of your finger, and it does the job. That's what you're after. Week after week, year after year if need be. That's it. These handmade scissors have been produced in Sheffield, England over 100. But, compared to a $2 mass-produced, the kitchen scissors will cost you over $100. A pair of professional tailor shears cost $315. To suggest what is it that makes them so expensive. Cliff Denton is one of just two to put together is left. Both in the 70s, they're the only one skilled enough to undertake the final delicate part of the process, the assembly of these scissors or putting together. You every street corner a little sharp from work and they've At one stage viewed 8 to 590 different. In the 1970s there were 150 small-scale scissor workshops and Sheffield now the just two, and keeping this craft alive relies on training the next generation of a got you just like magic ads at the stroke of a gym, and this still labs. It's odd because it's not so, but you can write down. They actually do it. Unlike mass-manufactured scissors, almost all of the work is done by hand. The starting outline of this is hot drop forged off-site. This is called a may already have the shape of a very rough pair of scissors. The process is only just begun. The blanks first need to be drilled, accountable, untapped. This puts a hole in the center of each half, and as a threat to the hole, once that work is done, they have to be ground down. The blank has no blade on it whatsoever, so initial grinding has to be done a 50-year-old machine before further refinements done by hand. So, if you were to look at a cheap pair of scissors, you quickly notice that it's actually stamped out a piece of metal that they've just been bolted together, blade's edge puts on them. So, when we grind the inside of the blade, we'll say there are 3 angles to it, and you've got to have a curve from the pension. This is to the means that when the plate's together that you should be able to see the gap through the middle. We'll also want to grind in a twist, and finally we want to hollow the blade as well, and tables is only have a once the plate is on. The rough edges need to be sounded off from both the shrinks and the nail.